Folks, I'd always wanted a paradise fish, finally got one for my cold water tank, but made a mistake. Misdiagnosed his condition, didn't treat it correctly, and lost him after 3.5 months. I'm certainly no expert in the hobby, been in it 9 years, but I'm learning every day, and the goal of the channel is to share my experiences, good and bad. This is a bad one. So what I think happened, what I did, and what I should have done, my best educated guess coming up right now. Folks, videos like this aren't always the most fun to make, but my goal with the channel is to share my experiences in the hobby, both good and bad. This happens to be a bad experience where I made a mistake on a diagnosis and lost my paradise fish. So I'm hoping that there's some value in this video. I'm going to talk about what I think happened, where I went wrong, and what I should have done. And this is my best educated guess as to what actually happened and what I should have done. So if you find yourself in a similar situation to this, I hope that this video is helpful in some way. If you're not familiar with the paradise fish, also called the paradise gourami, it's one of the oldest aquarium fish in the hobby. It was imported in 1869 to France. It's a labyrinth fish like a betta. It likes cooler water temperatures. That's why I had it in my cold water tank. It's a really personable, smart fish. It may have lost some popularity over the years because other gouramis have been bred, but this is a fantastic fish. I'd wanted one for a long time and finally picked one up. Here he is a month after purchase. This is a younger one. As they age, their fins will grow much longer and more pronounced. I think this was a young male. And a lot of people say, well, paradise fish are aggressive toward other fish and their own kind. If you have the right tank mates, I never noticed any aggression toward any of these fish, toward the false Julie cories, the Siamese algae eater, the white cloud mountain minnows, of course none to the nearite snails, ottos, or the Malaysian trumpet snails. Very personal fish, always followed me around the tank and was very curious. If he wasn't looking at me, he was exploring the tank, looking at the other fish, just very curious and very inquisitive. Much like our betta fish, you can tell somebody is home. They're aware of their surroundings. They're aware of you around the tank. They learn to recognize you. So everything for 3 months was fine. I had to leave on a work trip for 3.5 days, and when I came home, here's what I found. So after everything being fine, I noticed that on his left-hand side, he had 4 new wounds, and these were pretty deep wounds. You can see all those here, and on his right-hand side, he had an awful and very deep wound on his right-hand side. And that's right here. Here's that deep wound. Now again, nothing had changed. His fins had grown out a little bit, but his body was the same size. The wood hadn't changed positioning, neither did the rocks. And I didn't see anything on any of the other fish. Now granted, the cories and the white cloud mountain minnows are too small, but the Siamese algae eater, equally curious, didn't show any signs of any wounds. He didn't look like, as he was exploring, he was getting scratched on any of the rocks and wood, and the paradise fish hadn't for 3 months either. Now here's my mistake, and here's how I initially treated it. I treated this like a mild or medium wound with stress guard, except 3, perhaps even 4 days had gone by, and a secondary bacterial infection was already likely settling in, and that can be a killer for our fish. Now with mild or medium-sized wounds, stress guard's a good call. It's got a colloidal protein agent. It seeks out and attaches to exposed wounds, to abrasions, and it delivers an aldehyde-based disinfectant. It also acts like a liquid bandage or a liquid scab because it provides slime coat protection. So it's almost like putting a liquid bandage over the wound. So in mild or medium cases, it's not a bad call to use stress guard. Now you can see on their safety data sheet here, this is an older one. Their new one's on their website, but their older one actually has the ingredients. And it's glutaraldehyde. That's an aldehyde-based disinfectant, similar to what we find in Excel, interestingly enough. But this was a very different situation. The wounds were large, 3 or more days had passed, a secondary infection was likely developing, so simply dosing stress guard wasn't enough here, and of course it wasn't. After a couple more days, here's the state the paradise fish was in, and unfortunately a few days after that, the poor guy looked like he went through a blender. This is how I found him. I did dose the tank right after I saw this as well, about a day after doing some more research with Prezi Pro. And I did that for a reason, and I want to tell you why, because here's what I think happened. And I'm certainly not an expert in the hobby. I've been in it 9 years. I'm learning every day, but here's my best educated guess. I first thought, was he accidentally scraping on the wood or rocks while exploring? Well, he had only scraped his nose once. I've never seen anything this bad in 3 months. His body, again, is the same size, nothing had moved around, and the Siamese algae eater was fine as well. He equally explores a lot, and there really weren't many hazards in the tank, and he certainly didn't have any scratches on him. And though there are a few little pieces of wood that might cause a little bit of a hazard, most of it's pretty smooth. The rocks are pretty smooth. So I don't think anything was accidental. I think it was intentional scraping or scratching on surfaces of the wood or the rocks due to skin flukes. Specifically the Gyrodactylus parasite, that's the skin fluke, not the gill fluke. Now I have done a video before on gill flukes. The symptoms of gill flukes, of course, are very easy to see. It's when a fish is deliberately scratching or scraping its gills against surfaces in the tank. Gill fluke, and I'll just say the dactyl fluke because I don't know how to pronounce that, but that is a specific type of fluke. This type of fluke is the skin fluke that I believe my paradise fish contracted. This is the Gyrodactylus parasite, and I learned a little bit more about flukes in general. So gill flukes can infect the skin, but skin flukes can also infect the gills as well. And the symptoms you're going to see are clamped fins, heavy breathing, increased mucus on the body, and of course scratching or scraping on objects. Now the paradise fish could have very well, for the 3 days I was gone, have been scratching like crazy and scraping himself to get rid of them. Now I did rule out anything internal in terms of parasites because his poop did look nice, healthy, and brown. It wasn't long, white, and stringy. It wasn't white and milky. The poop actually looked healthy, so that kind of ruled out any kind of internal parasitic infection. So where did the flukes come from? Well, they're naturally occurring in our tanks, much like the opportunistic bacteria that cause fin rot, except usually our fish's slime coat and immune system fend them off. Now, while treating with the Prazzi Pro, it was too late when I got back from the trip. What I should have done is quarantine the paradise fish and treated the bacterial and parasitic infection. Treating with Canaplex, that takes care of gram-negative bacteria, and Prazzi Pro could also use API General Cure for the parasitic infection. Another option would be to throw Stress Guard there in the mix. The Stress Guard will help deliver the Canaplex effectively over to the wounds. I could have used erythromycin to treat the bacterial infection and perhaps Sechem Paragard to treat the parasitic infection, or erythromycin and Prazzi Pro. The point is, I should have taken him out, treated this in quarantine, and treated both the parasitic infection and the secondary bacterial infection. So if you ever see these wounds and they kind of happen suddenly, know that Stress Guard can help mild to medium wounds, but this was 3 days in, a secondary infection likely settled in, needed to be addressed with antibiotics along with the parasitic infection. Know that skin flukes can infect the body, body flukes can infect the gills. So if you see gill or body flashing, treat accordingly, treat right away. If the wounds are this deep, treat that secondary infection as well at the same time. Now, signs of gill flukes, of course, the fish flashing its gills against objects or its body. Serious infestations can cause the fish to wound itself. That causes the secondary infection. You'll see clamped fins, labored breathing in the advanced stages, increased mucus production. So I certainly am going to handle this much differently if I ever see this in the future moving forward, and I hope that was helpful in some way. We are still taking submissions for the second episode of Show Us Your Tanks. Only need a couple more, 1 or 2. If you'd like to show us your tank, simply send an email to dmichaelsfishden@gmail.com, a picture or video of your tank, a description, what type of fish you're keeping, how long you've been in the hobby, really anything you'd like to tell us, and we'll feature you on the next episode. Again, I hope that video was helpful to you. Was I right? Let me know your thoughts about what I believe happened. Of course, I'm not an expert, just sharing my experience, and that's my best educated guess. Please like, comment, subscribe for future content, and as always, folks, really appreciate you watching.